Guten Tag, WAP. This is Mr. Liniger. Let's make history today as we go over Unit 4, Day 12. We're going to talk about Eastern Europe, and we're going to talk about the big events in the Cold War and the end of the Cold War during this time. But let's get started with our daily punishment. Why didn't the cat go to the vet? He was feeling fine. Feeling? Like a feeling? Fine. Key terms for today: Nikita Khrushchev, de-Stalinization, Leonid Brezhnev, Gorbachev, Mikhail Gorbachev, Perestroika, Glasnost, the Bay of Pigs, the Cuban Missile Crisis, Detente, Prague Springs, the Solidarity Movement. We're going to go over the causes and progression of the Cold War and life in Eastern Europe during the Cold War. So let's talk about the Cold War in Eastern Europe after World War II. After World War II, Communist Russia is going to refuse to hold open elections. They're going to refuse to leave Eastern Europe, which they promised to do in Yalta. They're going to create Soviet satellite states there. They're all going to be communist countries and going to do what Russia says. All of these Eastern European countries are going to become authoritarian dictatorships. The government will control all aspects of society. They'll regulate all aspects of life. The government will control the media. They'll have a strong bureaucracy. Industry will heavily focus on the military and not on consumer goods, just like in the Soviet Union. Let's talk about the Soviet culture, economy, and society. Russia and later these Eastern European states are going to have rapid industrialization. The state's going to foster and control it from the top down. There will be significant social change, complete secularization of society, purging all religions. There'll be persecution of ethnic, religious minorities. Arts will be monitored to reflect Soviet culture. The official arts, the arts that will be liked the most, are constructivism and social realism, or socialist realism. Science and social studies and mathematics will be heavily favored in education. These societies will be fully industrialized by the 1950s. There's not going to be environmental laws, so there's going to be huge damage to the environment, ecocide. And the agricultural society will be heavily and horribly inefficient with the collectivization of agriculture. Joseph Stalin's going to die in 1953. Nikita Khrushchev will become the new leader of the Communist Russia, the chair. He's going to open up society to innovation. He will do some decentralization, and he's going to create a policy called de-Stalinization. De-Stalinization, where he allows some freedom of speech to criticize Joseph Stalin. He admits to all the mass murders Stalin did, and he kind of encourages people to destroy Stalin's statues and to realize that Stalin was a horrible person. This is going to upset some of the conservative communist Russian leaders who like Stalin. Khrushchev will begin the space program, and Russia will launch the first satellite, Sputnik, which will catch the West by surprise. After this, the West is going to quickly try to focus on educational reform, to focus on math and science, and to catch up their space program. There's going to be a battle between America and Russia to see who can get to the moon first. America does win that with the Apollo mission in 1969. Khrushchev is going to avoid the adventurism in foreign policy. He's not going to try to conquer any more countries. But when any countries try to overthrow the communist government that are already communist, Khrushchev is going to enforce Soviet power. So, for example, Hungary is going to have a rebellion, and he is going to send the Soviet tanks in to crush the Hungarian uprising. Khrushchev will support communist countries. He's going to support Fidel Castro and communist Cuba. When after Cuba becomes communist, he's going to send nuclear weapons into Cuba, which is going to lead to the Cuban Missile Crisis. I'll get back to that in a second. In 1961, America was afraid that Cuba had become communist. The CIA is going to arm and train some Cuban exiles in Florida. They're going to give them weapons and drop them into Cuba. They thought they could overthrow Castro. This will be a fiasco and will not be successful. John F. Kennedy will be blamed for this, rightly. In 1962, America found out that there were Russian nuclear bombs in Cuba. This freaked out America because Cuba was right by the United States. For 13 days, there was a crisis. America said that any attack from Cuba would be blamed on Russia. We're going to blockade and quarantine Cuba. And basically, we told communist Russia they had to get the nuclear bombs out or it would lead to World War III. For 13 days, it looked like there would be a nuclear war. At the very end, America and Russia made a deal. Russia withdrew their nuclear bombs from Cuba, and America, within the next 6 months, will withdraw their nuclear bombs from Turkey. Khrushchev will become too difficult to control, and he'll be overthrown in a coup. Brezhnev will assume control. He's going to be more stable and more conservative. He's going to get rid of de-Stalinization, going back to praising Stalin. He's going to introduce something called the Brezhnev Doctrine, which says that Russia will intervene in countries that were communist to maintain communist control. An example of the Brezhnev Doctrine is when Czechoslovakia tries to get their independence and be able to choose their leaders and choose a more liberal form of communism. He will send an army in and crush their uprising. That was called Prague Springs. Yugoslavia and Albania will become independent communist states. They will leave the Warsaw Pact. They'll remain neutral during the Cold War. They'll kind of ally with communist China. We talked before about how in 1956, Hungary is going to do an uprising to try to get rid of the communist government. They thought that with de-Stalinization, Khrushchev will be more liberal, but he's going to send the tanks in and crush the uprising. In 1968, Czechoslovakia is going to have a similar uprising called Prague Springs against Brezhnev. This is going to be led by a liberal leader called Dubček, who's going to try to create a more liberal form of socialism, socialism with a human face. The Soviets and the Eastern European forces are going to crush Prague Springs and liberal communism. In the 1970s and 1980s, Poland was always they were communist, but they never liked it. They're strongly Catholic, strongly nationalistic. There's going to be kind of a revolt in Poland led by their labor movement. It's not going to be a military or political revolt. It's more an economic revolt led by their labor union, the Solidarity Movement, and Lee Walesa. He's going to be arrested multiple times. At times, it looked like Russia was going to invade Poland. They never do. The Pope at this time was Polish, and that's going to cause more tension. And Poland's another area that is trying to resist Soviet control. In the 1970s, there will be a period of détente. Détente is a French word. It means like easing tensions, cooperation. Both the superpowers during this time are going to agree to détente in the late 1960s and 70s. An example of détente is like trying to reduce the amount of atomic bombs and intercontinental ballistic missiles. So in 1972, they signed SALT I, the Strategic Arms Limitation Treaty between America and the Soviet Union. They also passed another agreement in 1979, which Congress never agrees to. In 1980, détente is going to kind of be demised. The Soviet Union is going to invade Afghanistan. America is going to do economic sanctions. They're going to walk out of the Olympics. We're going to start training Afghan rebels to fight back against communist Russia. Ronald Reagan will become president, and he's going to end détente. Reagan thought the Soviet Union was the evil empire, and the only thing they respected is force. He's going to build something called the Strategic Defense Initiative, also known as the Star Wars program, where he tries to build a laser in the sky that could knock down nuclear weapons. This never was successful, but it did kind of frighten the Russians to spending even more money on their military, and it's one of the contributing factors that leads to the economic bankruptcy of the Soviet Union. America is going to pull out of Vietnam in 1973. Vietnam will become all communist in 1975. The Soviets will have setbacks in Afghanistan, and they will eventually pull out of Afghanistan by 1984, 1985. There'll be Cold War countercultural movements and the protests in Western Europe and America in the 1960s and 70s. Some of these movements are radical and support communism, despite the tens of millions of people that communists killed. But the Cold War is going to end. By the mid-1980s, there's a new leader, Mikhail Gorbachev. Mikhail Gorbachev was a reformer. He realized that the Soviet Union's economy was not working, that the countries that were part of the Warsaw Pact did not even want a part of the Warsaw Pact. So he's going to try to do some reform. He wanted to reform the communism. He didn't want to get rid of it, but we'll see what happens. He informs the satellite nations in Eastern Europe that each of it was on its own and he's not going to interfere anymore. That if they want to leave the Warsaw Pact, he won't do anything to stop them. After this, there'll be a rapid collapse of communist regimes across Eastern Europe and Central Europe by 1989. In Poland, Solidarity under Lee Walsia is going to win the election in 1990. The communism will be officially overthrown peacefully in Bulgaria and Hungary. Czechoslovakia will have another peaceful revolution called the Velvet Revolution in 1990. Czechoslovakia will be divided into two countries, the Czech Republic and Slovakia. The only violent revolution was in Romania, where the communist government tried to keep power and they shot the protesters. They were overthrown, and the communist leaders, the communist head of Romania and his wife, were both executed for war crimes. My girlfriend in high school was actually in Romania at the time, and she had bullet holes going through her apartment. East Germany is going to open up the Berlin Wall. Berlin will be reunited in 1989. In 1990, the two Germanys will become one Germany again, and East and Western Germany will become one country again. Gorbachev was trying to reform communist Russia. He had two major policies: perestroika, which was restructuring the economy. It basically means allowing capitalism in Russia, allowing more businesses and free market in Russia. He also allowed for glasnost, which is openness to public criticism, freedom of speech, ability to admit past mistakes. He thought these things would strengthen the Soviet Union, but what happened instead was people became more and more critical, and people are going to want to get rid of the communist Russia and the Soviet Union. In 1991, conservatives who hated Gorbachev are going to attempt a coup. They want to restore communism. With help of the local loyal Red Army, Boris Yeltsin, the mayor of Moscow, is going to crush the coup. The USSR will collapse, and Boris Yeltsin will become the first president of the Russian Federation. And communism will die by 1991. Victory, America. All right, guys, that's all I have for you for today. Until next time, deuces, deuces, deuces.